Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a time in every heart where we have to choose between what we feel and what we deserve. And perhaps the most painful decision we will ever make is choosing to walk away from someone who once made us feel alive. When deep down, no, they're not right for us. So today, I want to talk to the part of you that still lingers in the memory of someone who couldn't love you in the way you needed. I want to talk to the part of you that's tired of fighting for someone who never truly fought for you. I want to walk with you through 5 steps to emotionally detach from the wrong person, not because your feelings weren't real, but because your future deserves better. Detachment doesn't begin with distance. It doesn't begin with blocking their number or deleting old photos or unfollowing them on social media. Those are the outer symptoms of an inner reckoning. Real detachment, the kind that doesn't just move your body away from them but finally releases your soul, begins with one of the hardest things we'll ever have to do, getting brutally honest with ourselves. Because when we're still emotionally tied to someone who isn't good for us, it's not usually their charm that keeps us hooked. It's our own denial. Denial of how little they actually gave us. Denial of how many times they let us down. Denial of how much of ourselves we lost trying to earn something that should have been given freely. And we don't do this because we're weak. We do it because we're human. Because when your heart has invested so much in someone, it's terrifying to admit that it wasn't what you hoped. That the story you built around them, the future you dreamed with them, the meaning you assigned to all those little moments, it wasn't the full truth. And that confrontation feels like grief. A deep, disorienting grief that leaves you wondering if it was all a lie. But it wasn't all a lie. You loved them. You showed up, you tried, you poured in your time, your care, your faith, your energy. But love cannot be the only thing holding something together. Love on its own is not a glue strong enough to keep something from falling apart if it's built on shaky ground. And detachment begins when you finally admit to yourself, this isn't just broken, it was never stable to begin with. That kind of honesty stings. Because we have to look back at the signs we ignored, the promises that went unkept, the times we said, it's okay, when it really wasn't. The way we clung to every high so we wouldn't have to face the devastation of each low. We have to stop editing the past through the lens of what we wanted it to be and instead face what it actually was. And that means accepting that maybe they weren't emotionally available. Maybe they didn't care as deeply as you did. Maybe they loved the way you made them feel, but not who you really are. Maybe they enjoyed your loyalty, but never plan to offer the same. And that honesty feels like betrayal, because you realize the person you've been defending in your heart might never have shown up for you in the way you needed. But this is where your freedom begins. It's when you stop romanticizing potential and start recognizing patterns. When you stop asking, what if they just draw, and start saying, Panente didn't. When you stop justifying behavior with Thane had a rough past, and start asking, did they ever try to do better? Because your compassion is a beautiful gift, but it cannot be a substitute for boundaries. It cannot be the reason you keep tolerating emotional scraps and calling it a feast. Brutal honesty means facing the role you played too, not to blame yourself, but to reclaim your power. It means asking, why did I stay so long when I felt so unseen? Why did I keep proving my worth instead of honoring it? Why did I think their inconsistency was something I had to earn my way out of? Because sometimes the hardest part isn't admitting who they were, it's admitting who we had to become to keep them in our lives. The emotional contortion, the quiet self-abandonment, the pretending we were okay when we weren't, the waiting, the hoping, the minimizing of our needs, the silencing of our truth. And here's the brutal truth. You cannot detach from someone you're still lying to yourself about. You cannot heal from a relationship you keep rewriting in your memory just to avoid the ache. And you definitely can't move on while still secretly waiting for them to come back and finally be who you needed. Detachment begins when you stop saying, hey, maybe it was my fault, and start saying, no, this is not the love I want. It begins when you stop interpreting their distance as a test of your loyalty and start recognizing it as proof of their inability to show up. It begins when you let yourself see the relationship not as a fairy tale with a tragic ending, but as a lesson about what your soul was never meant to settle for. You don't have to hate them to let go, but you do have to tell yourself the truth. And that truth might sound like, and I wanted so badly to be enough for someone who never even tried to meet me halfway, or I made excuses for them because it was easier than accepting that they just didn't care enough. Or, and I stayed because I was afraid of being alone, not because it was healthy. These are not easy things to admit, but they are necessary. Because as long as you hold on to the illusion of what could have been, you'll keep emotionally starving in a relationship that no longer exists. And emotional starvation is deceptive. It convinces you that the crumbs they offer are rare delicacies, that the rare text, the occasional sign "I miss you," the late-night confession, it means they're still thinking of you, still caring, still loving. But deep down, love is not something that flickers on and off. Love is not a temporary high followed by days of silence. Love is not manipulation dressed up as mystery. And honesty means facing that their inconsistency was never passion, it was neglect. The honesty required to detach will ask you to rewrite the narrative you told your friends. It will ask you to admit that maybe you were more alone in that relationship than they even realized. It will force you to acknowledge that the pain wasn't just in the breakup, but in the countless ways you felt unseen while still together. And that kind of truth is hard to sit with, but it's the only truth that can set you free. So take the rose-colored glasses off. Look at the relationship in the cold light of reality. Stop romanticizing the tunifs and start recognizing the pot what was. Stop clinging to their potential and start accepting their choices. See them as they are, not as your wounded heart wants them to be. Because healing begins the moment you stop begging someone to change and start changing the story you're telling yourself about why they didn't. It's okay to admit that you loved someone who wasn't capable of loving you back. It's okay to grieve the relationship you thought you had. It's okay to feel ashamed, angry, broken, confused. But what's not okay is to keep lying to yourself just to avoid facing that pain, because pain faced becomes pain released. Pain avoided becomes pain repeated. And you deserve better than repetition. You deserve liberation. You deserve the kind of peace that only comes from living in truth. So ask yourself, what am I still pretending not to know? What am I afraid to admit because I know it means I'll have to walk away for good? What illusions am I holding on to because they're easier than the truth? Sit with the answers. Let them sting. Let them shatter whatever fantasy you've been clinging to, because what comes after that breaking is something far more powerful than denial ever was: clarity. And clarity is the first true step toward freedom. The path to emotional detachment is paved with painful truths, but every step you take in truth is a step away from the lie that kept you stuck. Every step you take is a step back to yourself. Because at the end of the day, brutal emotional honesty is not cruelty, it's love. It's love directed inward. It's the moment you look yourself in the eye and say, "Fight, you deserve better than this. And I'm done lying to keep someone who was never willing to stay." And that is where your healing begins. There comes a moment in every heartbreak story when you realize that holding on is no longer strength. It's self-betrayal, when all the calls, the justifications, the late-night texts, and the replayed memories become too heavy to carry. There is only one path left to take: creating space. And not just the kind of space where you physically stop speaking, but the kind that echoes through your emotional being. The kind that tears something from your chest and asks you to sit in the silence of what used to be. The kind that hurts deeply, but somehow slowly begins to heal. This kind of space doesn't feel noble at first. It doesn't feel empowering. It feels like dying, like erasing a part of your identity that was so tied to them, you forgot where they ended and you began. It feels like walking away from a fire that once warmed you, but now only burns you when you get close. You don't create space because you stopped caring. You do it because you finally admitted that caring has become your slow undoing, that closeness has turned into chaos, that hoping for change has become a form of self-torture, and detachment, that painful path you swore you'd never have to take, now becomes your only salvation. But the moment you pull away, even just a little, there's this overwhelming wave of grief that crashes over you. Suddenly, you're not distracted by the rhythm of checking your phone, anticipating their mood, or wondering how they'll respond. You're left alone with yourself. And that self is aching, desperate, shaky, full of questions that won't be answered. Your heart plays tricks on you. You remember the good moments with perfect clarity, the way their voice sounded in the morning, the way they looked at you that one night when everything felt right, the private jokes, the whispered promises. Your mind filters out the pain and highlights the sparkle. And in those first few days of creating space, it doesn't feel like you're healing. It feels like you're abandoning a lifeline. But it's not a lifeline anymore. It's an anchor. And you don't realize how heavy it was until you finally start to walk away from it. Creating space is about confronting the hard truth that connection doesn't always equal compatibility. That chemistry doesn't guarantee commitment. That love, even when real, is sometimes not enough to hold something together. And as painful as it is to step back, there is something quietly revolutionary about choosing silence over begging, peace over chaos, and self-respect over chasing someone who keeps running. And yet, space is excruciating in its early stages. You'll second-guess yourself 100 times. You'll wonder if this distance means it's truly over. You'll feel the urge to reach out, just to feel that spark again, even if it's fleeting. You'll feel like you're standing on the edge of a cliff, unsure if you're falling or flying. The silence they leave behind will scream at you, and that scream will tempt you to break your own boundary just for one more drop of connection. But that's the thing about emotional withdrawal. It's a detox, and detox is never pleasant. You're breaking an addiction to someone who became your emotional drug. Someone whose presence you depended on for validation, for comfort, for reassurance, even if it hurt you more than it healed you. And when you go cold turkey, you don't just miss them, you miss the version of yourself that existed when they were around. You miss the fantasy, you miss the rhythm, you miss the routine of dysfunction. And that's okay. You're allowed to mourn the pattern, even if it was unhealthy. You're allowed to miss them, even when you know they were wrong for you. You're allowed to feel like you're unraveling as you try to relearn life without their presence. Don't let the pain trick you into believing you've made the wrong choice. Pain doesn't mean it wasn't necessary. Pain just means you're releasing something that was once lodged deeply into your identity. Sometimes creating space isn't just about detaching from them, it's about finding yourself again, reconnecting with the silence you've been avoiding, hearing your own voice after months or years of only listening to theirs. It's about waking up in the morning and not immediately wondering what mood they're in, how to make them happy, or how to avoid triggering another withdrawal. It's about remembering what you like, what makes you smile, what makes you feel alive, separate from their influence. And at first you won't know. At first you'll feel hollow. Like a life without them is a life without meaning. But then one day, quietly, you'll wake up and notice that your chest doesn't feel quite as heavy. You'll laugh at something and realize it came from a genuine place. You'll stop checking your phone as often. You'll stop imagining what they're doing. The emotional tremors will become less frequent. And then you'll feel it, the slow return of self. That's what space does. It carves a clearing for your true self to return, not the version of you that was constantly pleasing, proving, waiting, chasing, but the version of you that existed before them, the you that had joy in her eyes, fullness in her heart, and purpose in her steps. The you that didn't need to beg to be seen. The you who knows that distance doesn't mean abandonment. It means choosing peace over performance. You will want to break the space. You will hear songs that remind you of them. Walk by places you once visited together. Remember the sound of their laugh, and your heart will ache. You'll feel that magnetic pull and think, just one message. But one message becomes a thread you keep pulling. And suddenly, you're back in the same cycle of almosts and maybes and if-onlys. You're back in a story that no longer serves your becoming. And you've come too far for that. Space isn't meant to feel like punishment. It's meant to be protection. It's the shield between your healing heart and the person who kept wounding it. It's the pause that allows clarity to emerge. Because when you're too close to someone, your vision becomes distorted. You rationalize behavior that's unacceptable. You explain away mistreatment. You become addicted to potential and blind to reality. But in the space, the truth becomes louder. And as painful as that truth may be, it is your greatest ally. Creating space also means removing reminders, taking down the photos, putting away the hoodie, letting go of the playlist, not because you want to erase the past, but because you need a clean canvas to paint the future. Because your mind and your heart need less noise to grieve fully and completely. And you can't do that when you keep reaching for echoes of someone who has already left. The space will test you, it will stretch you, it will feel like an open wound for a while, but one day that wound will scab, then scar, then fade. And you'll realize that the space you once resented became the very grounds where your rebirth began. You'll look back and feel gratitude, not for the pain, but for your courage. The courage it took to walk away from what was familiar but unfulfilling. The bravery it took to say, "Son, I deserve better," even when your heart still whispered, "But I miss them." You'll realize that your healing wasn't a straight line. It was a series of tiny choices made in the dark. Choices to stay silent, to stay away, to stay strong. And those choices, those private victories, are what created the path back to your wholeness. Creating space that hurts but heals is one of the most radical acts of self-love you will ever commit to. It is not easy, it is not clean, it is not quick, but it is worth it. Every tear cried in solitude, every moment of doubt, every pang of missing them. It all adds up to something beautiful. You'll return to yourself. So if you are in the middle of that space right now, hurting, missing, aching, hold on. Do not give up. Do not reach out just to feel less alone. Sit in the discomfort, sit in the stillness, let it transform you. Because healing is not about forgetting them, it's about remembering you. You are not weak for needing space. You are wise for creating it. And one day, when your heart no longer races at the sound of their name, when their memory becomes just that, a memory, when peace takes up more room in your soul than pain ever did, you'll smile, and you'll whisper to yourself, "'Tis space that once broke me is the very thing that saved me." There comes a quiet kind of sorrow when you wake up one day and realize you don't recognize yourself anymore. When the mirror reflects a face that feels familiar, but not quite yours. When you hear yourself laugh and it sounds distant, like it belongs to someone trying too hard. When your dreams, the ones you used to speak with fire in your chest, now collect dust in the back corners of your mind, and when you finally begin to pull away from the wrong person, when you create the space that once felt impossible to claim, something stirs in you, a faint whisper, a forgotten melody, a version of yourself buried under years of compromising, pleasing, shrinking, a version of you who never left, just quietly waited. That whisper is not just nostalgia, it is an invitation, an aching, undeniable pull to return to the you that you abandoned. Because the truth is, when you loved them more than you loved yourself, parts of you had to go missing. You didn't lose yourself all at once. You lost yourself in fragments. In every moment you stayed silent when your voice begged to speak. In every time you let something slide that broke your spirit just to avoid the fight. In every plan you cancelled, every boundary you bent, every dream you set aside to make them feel more comfortable. You told yourself it was love. You told yourself you were choosing peace. But it wasn't peace, it was self-erasure. You disappeared piece by piece, and now you're left standing in the aftermath, wondering where you went. Reconnecting with yourself after abandoning that inner sanctuary isn't glamorous. It's not some triumphant cinematic moment. It's slow, uneven. Sometimes it's lonely. Sometimes it hurts more than the heartbreak itself. Because you're not just mourning them. You're mourning all the ways you let yourself disappear trying to keep them. All the colors you dimmed, all the feelings you swallowed, all the parts of you that once radiated joy now dulled by sacrifice. You remember who you were before them, not in facts and details, but in energy. You were softer in some ways, braver in others. You had edges they didn't like, so you smoothed them. You had fire they couldn't handle, so you smothered it. You had needs they dismissed, so you learned to silence them. And now, your task is not just to heal from what they did, it's to make peace with what you allowed. It's to forgive yourself for abandoning the person inside you who only wanted to be seen, honored, cherished. But this reconnection isn't about shame. It's about homecoming. It starts in the quietest of ways. When you choose to sit with yourself in the stillness, rather than distract yourself with someone else's attention. When you journal what you're feeling, not what you think you're supposed to feel. When you pick up an old hobby, not to be productive or impressive, but because it simply makes you feel alive. When you say no to something and feel the unfamiliar rush of self-respect bloom in your chest. These moments are small, but they matter. They're you, finding your way back. Sometimes it's not about doing more, it's about undoing. Unlearning the reflex to apologize for existing, releasing the guilt you've carried for being too much or not enough, letting go of the belief that your worth is tied to how much you can give, how quiet you can become, how well you can fit into someone else's mold. Reconnection means remembering that your needs are not burdens, your feelings are not inconveniences, your dreams are not selfish, they are sacred. You begin to retrace your steps. Who was I before I made them my world? What lit me up? What made me feel grounded? What did I dream of when no one was watching? And as you ask these questions, you'll hear faint echoes at first. Maybe you used to write poetry. Maybe you loved walking under the stars. Maybe you danced in the kitchen without feeling self-conscious. Maybe you had rituals that made you feel divine, morning coffee, late night journaling, painting, praying, creating, moving. These are not frivolous things. These are the threads that wove you together, the things you let unravel in the name of keeping a connection that cost you too much. You'll remember how much life there is outside of the pain, that joy doesn't need permission, that you don't have to earn rest, love, or space. That solitude isn't emptiness, it's sanctuary. And in these moments, you begin to reclaim the person you buried, the one who always deserved your loyalty, the one who didn't need fixing, just honoring, the one who had dreams so beautiful they scared her, and a heart so deep it terrified shallow people. As you reconnect, you'll also begin to see the truth more clearly, not from a place of bitterness, but clarity. You'll realize how often you accepted crumbs and called it a feast, how often you mistook intensity for intimacy, how often you confused sacrifice for strength. You'll look back at your younger self, the one who stayed, waited, chased, and instead of judging her, you'll hold her. You'll thank her for surviving, for trying so hard, for believing in love, even when it broke her. And then you'll promise her something she's waited a long time to hear: I won't abandon you again. You start living for yourself again, not in rebellion, but in reverence. You choose the book you want to read, the people you want to be around, the pace that feels right. You create a life that feels good on the inside, not one that looks good on the outside. You laugh louder, you rest deeper, you dress for yourself. You listen to music that speaks to your soul, not just what reminds you of them. You create routines that nourish you. You stop negotiating your worth. You stop chasing people who make you feel replaceable. You stop waiting for someone to come back just so you can feel whole again, because you are learning to be whole on your own. And somewhere along the way, the ache begins to soften. The noise fades. The anxiety you once felt every time they pulled away is replaced with peace. Not because you stopped caring, but because you started caring about yourself more. You stopped needing them to validate your existence. You stopped needing the relationship to define your identity. You stopped needing love to hurt in order to feel real. You rediscover your strength not as a shield, but as a quiet knowing that you can walk away, that you can let go, that you can be alone and still feel complete, that you can want love without losing yourself in it, that you can open your heart again, slowly, wisely, fully, because this time you'll bring your whole self to the table. Reconnecting with the you that you abandoned is the most sacred work you will ever do. It requires grief, patience, tenderness. It asks you to hold space for all the versions of you that got lost in someone else's storm. It asks you to rebuild a relationship with yourself so rooted in respect that no one can come in and shake it. It asks you to prioritize your own emotional safety, to choose love that doesn't ask you to disappear to feel desired. You may not find her all at once, but every day you show up for yourself, she gets louder, clearer, braver. She begins to walk with you again, hand in hand. And she's not angry that you left. She's just grateful that you came back. Because you've never truly lost her. She's been there all along, waiting to be remembered, waiting to be chosen, waiting to be loved by you.